Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 21, Princess of Brigid. The first week of their break was in full swing now. Whilst some chose to spend the beginning of the next month in a somber, relaxed state, others would train, study, or if you were someone of a different culture, such as Petra, hunting would be a fun way to pass the time. The cooks in the canteen often appreciated support from her gathering new supplies, and the knights working at the gates of the academy knew Petra well, for she had always left the grounds in her spare time. Whether it be rabbits, deers, or fishes, Petra would always find them. On weekends it was always the same. She would wake up far too early in the morning for her own good and begin studying upon the texts covered recently from the professors. After which, Petra would visit Sitha's office and get permission to leave the monastery gates immediately before he began his work, so as not to intrude. Through harmonizing with the forest nearby, Petra would spend her time hunting and training her body for most of the day. Once she was on her way back, a huge bag of materials would have been found, which she would then donate towards the cafeteria. After then studying the language of Fodlan for a bit in the library, Petra would visit the training hall, and eventually go home at night for a peaceful end to a hard day of productivity. It was a long, tiresome, but fun way that she would spend her days. It would always be worth it in the end, as Petra was one of the highest performing students in her class, second only to Edelgard, and whilst she enjoyed her spotlight, it was apparent to everyone around her that she always kept to herself unless absolutely necessary. Being from a foreign background, Petra never wanted to disturb anyone, and even if she did, she always made it quick. On one instance that she had been surprised by a classmate, was when she had been studying in the library. Out of coincidence, Dorothea had come in to do the same thing, and as they worked, she had been tapped on the shoulder. "Do you ever miss Brigid, Petra?" How many times had she been asked this question? It was never annoying. In fact, she enjoyed being asked this. It showed that she still mattered to those around her. "If you ever need anything, I don't mind helping out once in a while. I want you to feel at home. I am having much difficulty finding home in Fodlan, but that is still not all true. I am finding some homeliness in your kindness." "That's good," Dorothea smiled. "Oh, that reminds me. After this, me and Bern are having food in the cafeteria later, so why not try coming too? Food in Fodlan gives me much intrigue. In Brigid, we are having things of much more difference. I will enjoy your offer, though." On this day, Dorothea had ignored Petra's enthusiastic reply, and had launched herself into a spiral of thoughts for concern. The very next day, Petra awoke to find Dorothea and Bernadetta holding dishes from Brigid on her doorstep. After a taste, she resolved to never mention food around Dorothea again, but ate it nonetheless out of kindness. "What do you think, you two?" Dorothea gleaned excitedly. "It is, of unique interest." Petra replied with hesitation. "Please, just try to let me handle the actual cooking next time." Bernadetta had begged to differ. After which, a laugh was given from the group when Dorothea was seen gasping for water after tasting her creation. The trio would remember this memory with laughter, and they soon became good acquaintances. In conclusion, Petra was as much an icon in her class as she was loved for her kindness, honesty, and diligence. A month later, and she had gotten along with almost everyone in the Black Eagles, except Casper, who chose to avoid her unless instructed against doing so. Regardless, Petra minded her own business, and in turn was rewarded for it. As usual, she did the exact same routine as stated before after their long mission to the Red Canyon. The walk was long, and this time, she was more tired than usual when getting up, but she still persisted and gathered permission from Sith to go outside of the monastery gates. "Are you sure you should be doing this? I heard the Red Canyon was a long way away from here. I am wanting improvement." She needed only to say that for Sitha's approval, and after hearing his surprisingly soft chuckle, Petra was seen regaining her eagerness once she had left the gate with a large bag for storage. After some time in the forest, she had rested atop the trees, sleeping away for an immeasurable amount of hours. When she awoke from her high view, she looked across to find another individual on the far side of the forest. He was a man with soft brown skin and black hair. From the yellow cape, Petra knew immediately that this was Claude, the house leader for the Golden Deers. It brought her joy to see that there was still another odd student in the academy, and whilst she had wanted to interact with him for this day, her schedule dictated that it was time for her to make her way back to the monastery. From immediately jumping down the tree, she alerted Claude from his nap, but made a quick dash and got away in time. His quizzical look afterwards gave her a childish snicker as she looked back, and Petra vowed to return some other day to get along with Claude. On her way back, the head chief behind the cafeteria's management was surprised to see a lower amount of animals than usual, but a quick explanation over her last mission had gotten her excused. Finally, it was now evening. Petra held off skipping the daily library trip for now, as she had already gained a rest earlier in the forest, so it might do her good to exercise in the training hall. The training hall was exactly as the name would suggest. It was a room dedicated to the practice of combat, and hosted a pool of wooden training weapons and straw dummies to knock over. The room was popular with knights and students alike, and this even sparked events to be created frequently within the weekends. At one point, Ria had hosted a great tournament for the grounds to participate within, and after much popularity, it was a continued tradition for every month, which tested students and knights alike on their weapon skills. The training hall was located to the far southeastern side of the academy, and was protected by large wooden doors to help prevent the sounds of clashing weapons from spreading to the dormitories nearby. When Petra arrived at the training grounds, she was surprised to see a rare face appear within it. As she smiled at the sight of Linhard practicing his healing magic on one of the students beside him, she could not help going towards him. "I don't understand. All I did was withhold information until absolutely necessary, so why am I the one being punished? It might be because you weren't being considerate to those around you." The person who was being healed had replied. "Without hopefully intruding too much, I think that if you are looking to become a knight after you graduate, it might be a good idea to learn from this. I'm not like you, Ash. I plan to sleep my days away after I graduate. It seems tiring to risk my life every day, don't you think?" "Hey." Ash got up in enthusiasm. "A knight isn't always risking their lives. As long as you can carry chivalry in doing anything, then your job is done. That's what makes knights so dash." "Hello, Linhard." Petra accidentally cut in from their conversation. Ash, who had just stood up, looked incredibly embarrassed at the realization that he had let his passion ring out across the hall. As Petra gave him a friendly smile, he only further wanted to keep to himself. As he waved goodbye to Linhard, he walked slowly away. Petra looked back at him. She could have sworn that he was a boy in the Blue Lion's house. Normally, he seemed quite reserved to himself. After moving onwards from Ash, Petra focused once again on Linhard. "Are you having realization to finally train now?" she asked. "Give me a break." He sighed, still clearly in an annoyed state. "Professor Billet was originally mad at me, but I wasn't expecting the same for Professor Byleth either. Those two wouldn't leave me alone on our walk back, and now I'm doing a month's worth of training here as punishment from them. Why is this the case? If you must know, apparently I didn't tell them about my distaste for blood sooner, so they gave me a very drawn-out lecture. I'm now being forced under this strict punishment, because apparently I could have endangered lives if the battle went differently. That is true, yes. But it went well in the end. I don't see why I have to be subject to this punishment, when I'll likely never do this again, and are even ended up going successfully. Your statement does have some truthness dash." "Truth," Linhard corrected her. "Just say, truth. Your statement does have some truth in it, but I am also seeing how the professors would have madness for you. Whatever the case is, I'm still stuck here for the month." As Linhard groaned, Petra knew that there was nothing she could do to help her friend. As she picked up the wooden sword in the basket of weapons beside her, she then began practicing her usual swings. They were nothing but measly strikes to get her into a proper rhythm for her session, but she noticed Linhard was looking with avid curiosity. She swung her sword once again with a ferocious level of speed, and this further gave Linhard his quizzical look. By the time the third strike had arrived, Linhard was now resting his head on his arms whilst sitting down. "I can't help but notice a flaw in your swinging. Are you realizing whether your transitions are sloppy?" He looked over the sword held by Petra and spoke. Your movements when bringing the sword back are far too slow. It seems you can perfectly strike at once, but you waste far too much energy, and you simply can't pull back fast enough. You're leaving too many openings for yourself when doing so. Petra swung again to check, and to her surprise, Linhard had been correct. She tried swinging again, however still failed to bring it back to her in time. These were from downward thrusts, however, so did they do the same with other directions? As Linhard watched Petra swing her sword around in various directions, he began to figure out the root of the problem. It seems you are right. Would you care to explain further as to how I can be fixing this? It's something with your elbow movements. You always stab in a dedicated position, right? Except, at that point it seems you let the tension go, and stop. You're doing far too many unnecessary movements. Now, she swung again to attempt to fix this issue, however to no avail was her solution found. How can I pull back without unneeded moving? It's the arm movement that's extraneous. Calculate the locus of the sword and the elasticity of the muscles. When he said this, Linhard was unaware of the confused look given to him. You're a smart one, so you'll get there. Elasticity, locus, extraneous. These words were far too complicated for her to apply Linhard's theory to. I may be having to look at this more. You think? Linhard yawned. Thank you for this learning you have given me. It was a short trip, but Petra looked up above at the setting sun. Most of her day was spent asleep, which she had not been too proud of. As she looked over at the gate, she realized that she could fulfill her physical training research, as well as her studies in the little time she had left with one visit to the library. So much time had passed today, and she still had so much to improve. As Petra looked over at Linhard, she felt envious at the fact that Linhard had truly helped slay the heart of the enemy on their last mission. In never getting a proper chance to show her worth, Petra's enthusiasm for training only increased. Now, she really wanted to become a better student at the academy, and this small library trip would help her. I shall be going now. She put her wooden sword away. Linhard, when is it that you are allowed to leave from here? I could have left half an hour ago, but you'd be costing me sleep if your swings were so slow as to impede mission progress in the future. I thought to help you for that reason, and it should benefit me eventually, so I don't see it as a disadvantage. Somehow, it felt as if Linhard was hiding his kindness with laziness, however Petra could not tell. He was always an enigma to the group, and as she looked at him, she sighed. I will be wishing you the good rest, Linhard. I'll try. He waved, not realizing that he was even doing so to begin with. Having someone cheering me on for sleeping? That's an odd one, probably weirder than anything Casper's said to me. Petra did not hear his muttering. In a brisk pace, she was eager to rush towards the library to gain access to a dictionary accustomed to her language. Soon enough, she would gain knowledge on what exactly Linhard was talking about. The library was a place of quiet, peace, tranquility, study, knowledge, and silence. In it, many students had crowded the tables, studying up on their classes, or reading through the many books available. Rumor had it that not all of the books within the library were of a free nature. Whispering had been going on even before Petra had attended the academy, that Seath had apparently overseen the materials written with each book. The source of these rumors, the librarian, Tamash. If anyone could describe Tamash as anything, then it would be aloof. In desperate times, he would seem quiet and conserved, whilst on a normal day, he often ran his mouth or walked slowly across the monastery. Tamash was truly a staple of the image for the academy library, and despite his old age, he still greeted anyone who entered with a smile. On this day, he did the very same with Petra. She walked inside, offered the same greeting back to Tamash, and proceeded to hunt for a table. Linhard had given her 3 words to learn for today. As Petra searched her mind to remember them, her eyes were also scanning a comfortable table to sit by. Elasticity, locus, extraneous, those are the words I should be learning. Finally, a familiar face was spotted. Oh, Casper, may I be sitting with you? From what it looked like, Casper was far too engrossed in a book to be listening to her. Petra ignored this and smiled. He was always not paying attention unless the class were doing practical work, so it was odd to see him studying. Cautiously, she sat herself beside him, and tapped him on the shoulder. Boo! Caspar was not amused by her attempt at playfulness. Is that not what you are saying for surprise? Oh, Petra. I didn't know you came here. It was not the kind of surprise that Petra was expecting, but she replied nonetheless. Linhard was confusing in today's training. I was needing help. Oh, is that so? He looked up from his book, and spoke once more when finally fixing his attention on her. Linhard always says some big and confusing words, so I can't help you on that one. Yes, he is always very smart. I am admiring of that. She chuckled, but shortened her voice once she realized that she was within a library. As Petra realized she was yet to actually find a book, she nonchalantly got out of the chair that she sat in seconds ago. Caspar could only watch, however his uncomfortable feeling grew. He watched her walk towards the shelves, struggle to read the titles of each book, ask for help, and then smile yet again at Tomasz when she finally received her required object. When she sat down again, the situation had been unavoidable at this point for Caspar. You needed help finding a dictionary? That's kind of ironic. The dictionary has iron within it. No, I mean he fumbled his wording, having realized that Petra still had trouble with the language of Fodlan. Ignore me. Just another term that you'll eventually learn, I guess. You have strength in language, Caspar. Do not worry, I will race towards you. Petra eagerly flipped through the pages of the dictionary. Caspar watched her do so. He wanted desperately to leave, but he also knew that this was a battle that had to be pursued immediately. For a whole month to be gone and nothing to be said, it was both baffling and foolish of him. He never knew what to expect of Petra. She reacted in such an odd manner, and everything about her was new and different. Even still, surely her reaction would be easy to combat. Hey, can I ask you if he stopped, immediately choking and regretting the words he said. Actually, it's all good. What he was met with was that of a gaze of worry from his apparent friend. I am not wanting complete secrets, however if you are feeling alright with something without my presence, then there is no concern. Yeah, sure. Petra finally found the page that she was looking for. As she browsed her eyes through the lines of formatted text, she zoomed her head closer to peer at the meanings in perplexity. In finding the meaning of locus, she cheered, unaware of the disruption she caused in the library. I have won this definition. She scrambled for paper from the table. It is a particular position or place where something occurs or is situated, which is easier than I thought. I am conquering this battle of words. Now, Petra nudged Caspar to ask for the pen he was currently holding. He reluctantly gave it to her, and watched her write down the learned meaning onto it. Now, the process had started again. She once again continued flipping the pages of the dictionary. Gah, you really don't need to keep pretending like you don't know, Caspar finally snapped. The library looked towards his direction, but his stare back at them had set them back to silence. Face it. You know everything, don't you? You know about my father. Your father? He is of the military in the Empire. I hear he has great skill. No, not that. Now, his shouts were obviously leading on to a lot of annoyance from those around him. He did not want neither Petra nor himself to be known for this, so Caspar took a minute to calm himself. He thought of everything that had happened, and relaxed himself. I'm talking about when Dada and Bridget invaded the Empire. Back then, both of you were so close, but still had rising tensions in politics when it came to the Empire. It was a time I had to endure much questioning. It is nice that it is done with. Petra, my father led the army that fended off Bridget and Dada, and your one led the very one that fought for your home, Bridget. Noticing what Caspar was implying, Petra finally put down her dictionary. My father, he killed yours. How long have you been knowing this? For all of the years so far, Petra had never sounded more so in distress. It lacked proper sadness or anger, but was instead filled with confusion and worry. As she looked down at the note she made for the term locus, Petra stared at it for a while. A particular position or place where something occurs or is situated. That is what a locus is. When had you known about the locus for this event. I only found out recently. I had no idea about this before then, but it's all I've been thinking about for the last month. You have been having strangeness because of this. Yeah. I thought you'd have known by now. Silence now set in. As the two looked over at the definition of locus sitting beside them on the table, they both felt negative feelings. It had now set in that this would potentially ruin the work ethic of the class. Casper had originally expected Petra to have a much weaker reaction, however her silence still stayed strong. She did not show a tear, quiver, or shyness. Instead, her head was simply gazing down, not knowing what to do now. So, now you have the truth. Petra spoke, but proceeded to take the sheet of paper and stand upwards from her chair. Casper watched her slowly leave. He could have easily caught up to her, but he did not want to, or did he? So many conflicting feelings were erupting within him, and he could not settle on one to act upon. Damn it, he cursed. What am I supposed to do now? Chapter 22, The Country of Fodlan. In finally being back in the monastery building, Billet found comfort in being able to soon teach again. Since there was simply a weekend of the Garland moon before lessons started as usual, Billet was in an extremely positive mood. Not only was the twins' birthday to be soon on the 19th of this month, but she was also given the option of not having to receive the group's monthly mission from the Archbishopric. Instead, Byleth offered to give his report to her, and Billet had the day off. A perfect time for relaxing before her birthday, except with nobody around, she had little to do. Not only was Geralt off for a mission immediately as the twins had gotten back, but all of the students resorted to doing their own hobbies for the day. There was no longer any cause for excuses now, and instead, Billet had decided to visit the library for her own purposes. In all of her life spent with their father, Geralt had never once explained to them the inner workings of Fodlan and how the three ruling countries worked. Instead, the trio used to travel from place to place without so much as a thought as to how the separate governments had fit into the world. Today, Billet wanted to dedicate her free time to learn of Fodlan, and just how it would function every day. It would be a boring, long, and arduous study, but hopefully it would also be worth the time. As Billet said her hello to Dimash, the librarian, she browsed through the various shelves scattered around the walls. Using the ladder provided to her, a long reach was made, followed by her having to lengthen her hand again to grab one of the oldest books within the storage of texts. As she dusted away the tome of history, Billet could only sigh at the time this would take for her to read. Father could have at least taught us this stuff. Rotten luck, she grumbled, flipping the large, square first page out of the way to reveal a huge mass of words in front of her. Couldn't you at least have written in a bigger handwriting, authors of this book? Everyone in the library had heard her groan. First it was the exclaiming nonsense from Petra the day before, and now the group had to visit the noises of Biletta's annoyance. As she unknowingly complained a chorus of curses for the library to hear, everyone could only wonder who would come next from the Black Eagle's classroom to halt their usual research. There was but one person who truly found no annoyance from all of her complaining. Instead, she giggled to herself in a childish manner, and even closed her own book for a chance of approaching Billet. With her bubbling green hair, small and puffy appearance, and soft face, the seemingly young girl began to approach Billet without her having knowledge of the small entity nearby her. Finally, a surprise was given. Professor Billet, it seems to me that you may need some assistance. Might I be of some help? I know the history of Fodlan can be far too exhausting for one individual to scrutinize by themselves. Somehow, without asking for it, Billet had found her saving grace which would excuse her from boredom. As she turned around, she recognized the girl after a few more seconds of thinking. She was the sister of Seath. Billet could remember their first and only previous meeting, where she had barged into the twins' conversation with Seath and Rhea to introduce herself, before she excitedly left immediately after. When looking at her, Billet tried her best to contain her awe at how small the girl seemed to be. From her meek height, it was almost as if she did not look at all like Seath's sister, and yet she still did, from the signature green hair. You're Flane, right? Billet closed her book to focus her full attention on the girl. I'm not exactly the best with names. Sorry if I can't remember immediately dash. I assure you that it is most alright. Please refrain from tensing in my presence. I am not at all like my authoritative brother. She smiled softly before speaking again. My name is indeed Flane, and I would be most happy with teaching you everything that you must know. Flane, huh? You're awfully tiny. Belette stood up in order to properly judge the difference in height between the two, which had slightly annoyed the girl. I assure you a mature woman such as myself is very much more capable than one would think. Belette laughed. I'll take your word on it, then. Hey, what is it that you find funny? Nothing, sorry. Belette retracted her statement quickly. She had wanted to learn of Fodlan, and losing her easy way of doing so would end up wasting her time. Hey, Flane, your brother, is he always so strict? Brother always takes some time getting to know people. Even now, he very much despises the very idea of me talking towards the male populace. He is unfortunately lacking in proper immediate understanding, but I assure you, he can sometimes pull through for us all. Belette thought back to her meetings with Seath. In the previous month, he had put forward his immediate distaste for the twins, and went as far as to tell them how he thought they were inadequate to fit as teachers. Flane seemed a lot more different, however. Rather than seeming scrutinizing, she was more accepting, open, and friendly. These were traits Belette could very much get behind, and were those which she could communicate the most easiest with. He never seems like that, though. As I would think so, too, however, I would like to ask you a favor. Flane looked over at the Book of Fodlan. Brother has a long history with the people of the church. He cares for them, as he does for me and everyone else. Please, just know he treats you with caution for the very being of protecting those precious to him. Flane put her heart into saying this, and as Belette looked at the expression of reminiscence from her face, she could not help but feel warm inside. How long had it been since she was having a nice conversation such as this? Finally, after the grueling mission she had previously been through, she could talk to someone and relax around them. I guess I can maybe do that, Belette mumbled. Say, Flane, did you come here to help me? I'm kind of really struggling with this. I mean, I know I've traveled all around Fodlan before, but I barely know all that much about it. Flane gave a laugh, but tried to contain herself when she noticed the annoyed face her new friend was giving. I wish for your apologies. It's just that seeing you know so little, despite having been in far more places than I have, it brought me a spark of joy. Please, don't embarrass me any further. Belette hid her face in embarrassment. Would a trade be possible in return for helping me? Immediately, the young girl's eyes lit with glee. She was originally intending to share her information with little hesitation, but Belette had raised the rewards for doing so. As a refined and mature woman, I shall participate in the art of haggling. Please keep in mind, my brother's going to kill me if I waste too many of my funds on you. Fish, Flane interrupted. Such a delectable, fulfilling, and most nutritious meal. I would most desire fish, which you can prepare for me in the cafeteria. Wait, what happened to haggling? That is exactly as I said. I shall have no other food, item, or product. I only accept fish. Flane's smug face had a sense of pride and happiness within it. At this point, Belette was far too charmed by the way Flane had chosen to communicate to refuse her so-called bargain. All right then, my treat shall be to give you fish, cooked, of course. I am most pleased. If you can keep this up, I may consider making you my future business partner. Brother shall be most happy in knowing how responsible I am right now. Is holding my soon-to-be knowledge hostage for fish called responsibility? Belette joked. We shall not stress over the details. This time, the library was surprised to find out that a Black Eagles member was no longer disturbing their usual routine, but instead, it was that of Flane. All of this joking aside, are you prepared? This is quite a lot to be learning, so I am not sure if you shall digest all of the information in the correct manner. I'm sitting right here. Seeing her enthusiasm, Flane realized it was now time for her to teach Belette. She quickly rushed towards another table and took the chair from it, making sure to remember to put it back once she had finished with it. Finally, she settled it next to Belette and sat down, making sure to tuck it within the table for extra comfort. Now, where to begin? She took the book from Belette on the history of Fodlan and flipped through the contents. It's all so seemingly complicated, but I assure you that I shall explain to the best of my ability. If you do not feel our previous bargain had satisfied my results, I shall not refrain from giving an equal equity of the fish you cook for me. Now, as for Fodlan itself, I do suppose I could go forward with the general itinerary that I had already planned out for this. First up, I would like you to know that Gareg Mach Monastery is within the very center of Fodlan. With 3 countries along the northeast, south, and northwest of the continent, we are but a small faction which helps stabilize the peace. As you may have previously known, the Adrestian Empire is the land where the Black Eagles would have resided in, with Edelgard being of noble standing from there. Also, the Holy Kingdom of Faerghus is where the Blue Lions reside, with Dimitri being the soon-to-be king of the country, and finally, the Leicester Alliance is where the Golden Deers are from, and as you could probably guess, Claude is very much going to rule there in the future as well. There are also smaller areas along the outer side of Fodlan, which reside nearby the Empire. Whilst they previously had a conflict in the past, Dada and Brigid have now chosen to ally with the Empire. Elsewhere, Almira is near the Alliance's territory, however, I am not quite sure what is going on there. From what I had heard, there is actually a student here from Brigid, which I do believe is in your class dash. You mean, Petra? Billet interrupted. Yeah, she's one of our best students. Yes, there is a lot more to her than one might expect. We also, coincidentally, have a person working within the church who hails from Dada. I'm sure you shall meet her eventually, so I will not go further, but rest assured, for now, all previous conflicts have ceased with the main groups. Oh yes, the individual countries themselves. Flane stumbled. It is a lot to learn, but I assure you that it will not be too important to revise all of it. Someone as mature as myself had gone through many years without knowing of this stuff, so I give you my word. In terms of how they function, the Empire is made up of many counts who patrol various parts of the land. Of course, there is a direct emperor ruling over the land, and the country is more famous for owning more than 1,000 years of history. The Alliance functions in a similar way, however it is run by a series of lords, who oversee everything and decide things via meeting. There is no real true organizer to their country, however Claude's house, House Reagan, are the ones who truly rule the land. Perhaps most different of all, is how the kingdom of Faerghus is run by typically traditional values. They are soon going to have Dimitri as their king, and they are mostly maintained by the knights that harbor the landscape of the kingdom. By this point, Flane had known she was explaining far too much, and she had to stop in order to let Billet truly process what had said. This is a lot. How much into detail does that book go into things, anyway? Flane laughed. Well, I skipped over events such as the insurrection of the Seven, the Dusker tragedy, and even the story of Nemesis, but it's far more complicated than one might realize. At best, I would suggest simply learning about what the countries are and how they link to one another. I'm sure you already know, but each of the houses in the academy are comprised of different students from their respective countries. This is way more than I bargained for. Billet was still mumbling in shock. How would you like more fish? I feel kind of bad if you've memorized and told me all of this for a single meal. Whilst that delights me to no end, I will accept no such thing. Flane smiled, feeling proud of all that she had gone over. Tell me, Professor, do you know what a crest is? Billet thought back to everything that Hanneman had explained to the group beforehand. Not much was said to her, but she could remember Byleth had been much more informed of the topic than she ever was. At this, Billet shook her head sideways. All I really know of, is that some people have them, whilst others don't. She thought back to the test conducted by Hanneman the month before. Currently, my brother and I both are showing signs of having one at least, that's what I was told. So, you are delightfully oblivious. Flane joked. As much as Billet would have been offended by this, she could not help but smirk at the sudden joke. Long ago, crests were something that had been lost to legend. How people got them was always widely debated, but many in the Church of Sirios believed that it was a divine gift from the goddess herself. What it did, how it worked, who it was given to, that was all dependent on the bearer of the crest, and their personal family attitudes to life. Normally, a crest allows someone to possess a unique trait. Most of the time, they are useful for combat, however some individuals in Fodlan have done far more with them. You may notice that it is mostly the nobility harboring a crest, that is a result of the balance of power being shifted, and many a times, crests are often associated with those in a much higher social standing. Inside of combat, they are used for the purpose of having an edge in combat. Some erupt their power immediately at any given circumstances, while others may show their talents in the rare few occasions, and sometimes in the most dire of situations, one might appear in the midst of a crisis. Crests can have healing traits, power growths, and even reduce fatigue within an entity. When they are used, you may often notice a green symbol appear from one's hand, showing that the crest itself is currently demonstrating their power. Bernadetta was using her crest, then. Flame showed confusion at this question, however Belletta's thoughts could only think of the previous battle with Costas. When she was angered, brought pain, or determined to defend those closest to her, Bernadetta had fired arrows at an inhuman pace, whilst a green symbol appeared from her. All along, her crest was what saved the group. Sorry about confusing you. It was in our last battle, at the Red Canyon. One of our pupils saved us with it. Ah, I see. Flame smiled softly. Yes, I do believe my brother mentioned that it is all stated in the roster files given to each professor at the academy. Darn, Billette cursed. Normally brother has them. Peculiar indeed. I'm sure that you can ask Seath within his office. Yeah, but he's scary. You are a much softer person than I initially anticipated. Flame laughed. A truly peculiar person, that is what you are. Hey. The pair began laughing in sync at this moment. By now, the two of them had become friends through this informative meeting. As Billette began thinking through her head, all that loomed along her mind were thoughts of happiness. After the tragedy of the previous mission, this was truly the type of encounter that she would have wanted. Suddenly, she remembered something. Occasionally within their teaching lessons, Billette could remember her brother often picking up sheets of paper from within their teacher's desk. That must be it, Billette thought to herself, after stopping her chuckle with Flame. The roster files, I mean. They're definitely where I thought they'd be. Would that truly be the case? Yeah, my brother often pulls them out randomly in our lessons. I always wondered why, of course, but now it all makes sense. That is most excellent. Flame jumped up in a cheer. You should see to it now. That way, you might be able to obtain a further grasp as to what a crest truly is. Yeah, this is perfect timing. As Billette sprung up from her chair, she faced Flame as she was clumsily putting her chair back beneath the table. I'll be sure to check it out. Thanks for the help, Flame. It is my pleasure to be of assistance. I do like showing my supreme knowledge, after all. Flame closed the book which Billette had been reading. Do not forget, that you will be owing me the delectable meal of fishes. Of course. What class are you in, then I can find you easily to treat you. I am not part of a class. Billette stopped immediately, hurrying once she had heard this. This young girl, who sported the officer's academy uniform, and who had been in this school far longer than the twins had, was somehow not a student here. Wait, what? It is a tricky situation, you see. My brother fears for my safety to quite drastic degrees, so I am not allowed to attend the academy properly as of yet. Flame chuckled. I usually learn within my free time. Billette could see the desire to learn from outside sources through the cracks in Flame's chuckle. Whilst she had been intimidated by Seath greatly, she had wanted to organize something for Flame. As she looked at her faint smile, Billette thought of not giving her too much hope. At least for now, she knew to organize something for later to help Flame. If you ever want a secondary source of learning, I don't mind tutoring you if not many people sign up for our sessions. Billette offered, forgetting the rules imposed by Seath. It can be anything. I don't mind. Her eyes glittered immediately with appreciation. Flame's smile grew far more prominently than before. Oh yes, that would be delightful. Maybe one day even, I could be able to convince my brother to be in your class. Yes, I hope so, too. For now, let's not get our hopes too high. Of course. I shall do my best in being realistic, as I am quite mature, I shall have you know. Yep, you're one of the most refined people I've ever met. Billet contributed to her point. I'll see you later, Flame. As I too, Professor. As Billet smiled one last time to her new friend, she ventured onwards to where she would find her answers. As she left the library, Billet realized how all of this time had passed, yet Byleth had not even left the chambers of Ria's hall. What was going on there was but one of the lingering questions in her mind. Elsewhere, in a time just when Billet had left to go towards the library, Byleth was assigned to report to the Archbishop Ria. When he and Billet had split ways, he could only wonder what she would do. Most likely, she would find ways of wasting her own time. The last battle had been very tricky for her, so Byleth assumed that his sister would be wanting to relieve her tension. He still had not figured out the emotional impact this brought on her, however Billet seemed to be acting as her usual self, so Byleth had no need for concern. As he opened the grand doors towards Ria's chambers, she stood in front of the white throne, putting on a gentle smile. The doors shut themselves, and Seath had appeared from towards the left office. Most likely, the sound of the door had alerted him of Byleth's arrival, allowing him to come and closely monitor what he had to say. "Welcome, child," Ria spoke in her soft tone as usual. It was clear she had no doubt that the twins had succeeded their very first mission. "I have heard of your successes, and from your students' general behavior, I trusted you have come out victorious." "That is indeed true," Byleth replied. "Costas was an enemy we had encountered before, whence we had come to the monastery. Sister's group had managed to dispel him and a majority of his most powerful allies, whilst my group was in charge of disposing of the remainder. Additionally, Sister had also Hey!" A voice appeared from Byleth's head, stopping his chain of speech. "Do not be one of haste. This Ria person strikes me with great suspicion, and I cannot quite realize what it is we should and should not tell her." The voice was that of Suthies. "It is best that we tread on a thin string, with slow and steady caution through both our words and actions." Byleth nodded his head at the response, however both Ria and Seath were showing their concern over his halt in speech. As Seath was only growing more annoyed by his behavior, he began to tap his feet in impatience. "Is there not something you should be saying to Lady Ria?" He spoke up, still keeping his formal tone, however he had hidden his malice within. "My apologies. I could not find the correct way of explaining the events that took place." Byleth corrected his actions. Sister had also been performing well in her combat developments, however, I realized that was not much of a concern, as you most likely care more for the well-being of the students. I care for the professors in this academy as much as I do the students. Ria had completely ignored what had happened before, acting as if Byleth had no trouble with his halt in speech. "You must take note of that." "Yes, Lady Ria. I am pleased with that." At this point, Ria walked closely towards Byleth, as if to close the distance between them, however this only made it much more apparent. "Sweet child, is there anything you would like to ask before we move on?" Byleth stayed silent. There was indeed a question he wanted to ask, and it was one in which Suthies had been pressuring him to do so. As he looked at Ria, he realized that she was a person that he could not dissect the intentions of. Her elegant smile was one of an odd darkness to it, however one could also say that Byleth was hallucinating in thinking so. Possibly, it could be that her high role was hindering his positive outlook on her. "Go on." Suthies erupted once more. "You barely did anything to help me last month, so it is up to me to begin pressuring you once more. Ask her." Her imperative question made Byleth realize the exact situation that he was within, and he replied instantly once he noticed that this was a prime opportunity to do so. "I remember the Red Canyon to be a peaceful place. Would it be possible to tell me about it?" Ria immediately displayed a face of great shock. "You remember?" "I cannot quite pinpoint what it was exactly that made me think so. Perhaps it was a place where I had traveled before with my father, or I could have been misguided in thought." Byleth directed himself towards the point of the question. "I would like to know more about the ruins that had been laying within it." "You speak of ruins, but would it be right for you to give more detail?" As soon as she asked this, even Seath had grown intrigued with the interaction taking place. Our enemy had been using it for various ambushes, however, that only highlighted its importance further down the line. We found withered gardens, corrupted marble pillars, and some traces of minor human activity. It was as if those very structures had been made to be usable by our species. That is partly correct. Ria's instant reply had suddenly alerted Byleth. What escalated this moment was that of Suthi's making an intrigued humming sound from within Byleth's head. To even set foot upon the canyon requires much effort and permission from the church's authority. It is sacred ground, and what most people call the Red Canyon is what we call Xanadu, the Red Canyon. Ria realized that she had much explaining to do, so she continued once more. There is much history to the place. If you believe that a certain life form had previously lived here, then you would be correct in assuming so. Long ago, an ancient civilization had taken refuge in the land we now call Xanadu, and so too did the divine Sirios receive a revelation from the goddess herself. Ria closed her eyes, as if to think back on the moment she had learned of this. It was a gift to guide the lost, and whilst now the goddess watches calmly over the people of Fodlan, she had previously graced humanity with her presence all those years ago. Without so much as a quiver, she opened her eyes to Byleth, giving a seemingly cold stare towards him. Byleth could only walk back slightly at her fixed face, but it was clear that something was amiss. That is why I wanted you to dispose of those bandits. Those who trample on the weak and the gifted, they are the ones most deserving of punishment. I care not for their lives, but if anyone is to step foot on Xanadu, I will personally see to it that they see an end. Her threat still held the gentle voice to it, but at this tone, both Seath and Suthi's had displayed signs of discomfort. To say something so drastic in such a manner, was something Byleth had yet to grasp the meaning of, but he could tell something was amiss when even Seath had shown a reaction. I understand. That was all Byleth needed to say to revert the topic, and he did so with success. Finally catching his signal, Seath cleared his throat and stepped forward, whilst Ria had taken the opposite direction to allow her colleague to have some space. At this, Byleth could hear a sigh of release from Suthi's, and they both watched as Seath prepared himself to give his next orders towards the twins. In regards to your mission for this month, I believe this one is of utmost importance. Seath crossed his arms in a sign of authority. We have received reports that Lord Lonato has rallied troops against the Holy Church of Sirios. Who is Lord Lonato? Byleth inquired. Lord Lonato is a minor lord of the kingdom territory, and has been so for a while. Whilst he used to show much generosity to those around him, he has recently been conducting hostile activity around the church, and seeks to put an end to us through scrupulous methods. In a sudden, the sounds of footsteps were heard from the entrance to the room. As Seath looked over Byleth, he could see that the door had been slightly opened, leaving a gap open for eavesdropping. His face showed some concern, but he continued so as not to disrupt the mood of the room. A vanguard unit from the Knights of Sirios is already on its way towards his stronghold, Castle Gaspard. You will be assisting one of the trusted knights for this mission, and will be tasked with helping the overall cleanup of the situation by the end of the month. Do not disappoint. Lord Lonato's army is nothing compared to the knights, so it is possible that it was already dealt with. War zones are still unpredictable, however, so expect the worst. I already know that from my experience, Byleth replied, oblivious to the possible arrogance within his voice. I thank you for the advice. It is appreciated. Seath would have normally been annoyed by Byleth's retort, but now he had fixed his gaze upon the door left open. Surely, he could trust Byleth with tending to the matter, right? As he looked at Byleth and recounted his previous royalty to those around him, he too realized that maybe giving the twins a few responsibilities would help solidify their legitimacy. On another note, Seath quickly changed the subject. I hope you noticed that an individual had been listening in on us from behind. Ria had noticed immediately now, and she soon placed a surprised look. See to it that nothing wrong happens, and if possible, find the one who listened in on us. Understood. That is all. Ria finally ended the conversation. You may be excused now. I trust you will continue with the hard work that you have been keeping up with. Please do not disappoint, as I have high expectations for you. I shall perform to the best of my abilities. Please do not worry. I am pleased to hear so. As Byleth began to leave, he could now see Suthi's floating beside him. Whilst she would appear invisible to anyone else around them, Only the twins truly had a vision of her. Suthies looked back towards Rhea for the last time in this meeting. Rhea was mysterious, suspicious, and even dangerous, and that was why Suthies was far too intrigued. I suggest we keep an eye out for that one. She turned back to Byleth and attempted to catch up to his pace via flotation. I simply cannot stress it enough, but that woman strikes me in ways more than one would think. Byleth did not show a reply, but he had still registered her instruction. As they opened the door fully, he was going to attempt to close it, up until a hand had grabbed it from him. "I'll take it from here, rookie." A rough feminine voice had appeared behind him. "Who might this be?" Suthies popped up from Byleth's shoulder. "Rookie?" Byleth inquired. "Oh, right," the voice sighed. "Sorry, you still don't know me yet. The name's Catherine. I'm a loyal knight working for Lady Rhea." The knight before him offered her hand to be shaken. "I'll be helping you out for the mission this month, so expect to see some awe-inspired faces once I resolve the mission." The knight before Byleth was that of a tall stature. Whilst all of her armor was that of a clean, white color, Byleth noticed that the lady must have been from foreign descent, from the tanned color of her skin. She had rough, blonde hair, which tangled downwards to the direction of her neck. On her bottom, she wore casual black shorts, but had chosen to cover it with a white robe strapped towards her waist, which helped assist her in free movement. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Catherine." Byleth let go of her hand. From what he could see so far, the knight seemed far too free-spirited and careless to be that strong. "I shall look out for you when we work together." "Huh, the rumors really are true. You do actually talk all stiff-like." Catherine laughed. "You were looking all around me when we shook hands too, so I'll bet that you were testing if you could get a good look at my capabilities." "I did no such thing," Byleth lied. "That doesn't matter to me. When we're dispatched to take care of Old Man Lonato, you'll see plenty of me to make a clear judgment for yourself, so be ready." Catherine smirked slyly. Suthies began to rise over Byleth, and had now swirled around in a floating movement to properly examine Catherine. As she returned, she spoke to her friend. "Across her back, she carries a large sword of orange glow. It frightens me." Byleth now looked towards the girl, realizing that this knight may be far more powerful than he would think. "Look out for her. She is our ally, but even I feel as if she is holding a strong power of ferocity with her. I need to go to Lady Rhea right now, so I'll see you later, Professor." Catherine now opened the door to the throne room. "Look forward to it. In a few weeks, I'd like to properly get a good bash at our rivals." The door closed, leaving the pair to silently figure out how to react. "She was a peculiar one," Byleth commented. "You may say that again. I have got my own worries, but also some calm as well. We shall just have to see whether she really is as strong as her sword permits her to be." "You are correct about that." As Byleth turned around to make his way out of the door, he turned left to go to the library. A student passed him. He had a small, meek figure, gray hair, and a hoodie uniform, much like Bernadetta. It was the only student that walked in the corridors, and as he carried his books of night stories on one hand, he looked as if he were readying his other. Byleth and the student passed by one another. The boy tried to reach his hand to tap Byleth. He stopped it in losing confidence. Suthies looked back, seeing his sorrowful face across him. Should she tell Byleth to consult him? Or would that simply bring him great discomfort? Sister does much the same as he did. "There are some things that I find are not suitable to tell, and I have found that people realize this at the last moment," Byleth commented, as if to answer the questions on Suthies' mind. "You act like an expert on human emotion, but I can already tell you have not the slightest idea about it." Suthies sighed. "I can feel and see all of what you two feel. All I'll really say is that you are in a position where evaluating your circumstances would benefit you greatly." Byleth ignored this, and Suthies knew that. She instead looked back at the student behind them. As they were widening their distance between each other, she could see that the boy was gripping his fists and looking towards the marble flooring below him in frustration. Suthies squinted. Somewhere deep within her mind, she could have sworn that she saw a tear. Finally, after much effort and investigation, Billette had found the key to the Black Eagle's classroom. As she sprinted inside in excitement, her hand rushed towards the cupboard on the front desk. "Come on, please let the roster files be somewhere here." Her hand rummaged through the open cupboard, up until she finally found her target. As she looked through the file of various paper sheets, she saw that each page had dedicated information for each student that was in the classroom. Everything from current backgrounds, to birthdays, crest information, and even current grades and interests were on there. "I knew it." She looked over at Bernadetta's crest information. It says here that her crest lets her speed up her movements when she gets overly emotional. It can range from happiness, sadness, or anger, but most commonly comes from exhilaration. As such, it's been typically associated with being fit for battle. Billette scanned through the paper sheet one last time. The crest of Indec. That's the name. I wonder what other crests everyone have. Surely it would not have been an invasion of privacy if this information was already given to the twins. That was the secret ploy that Billette had given herself in order to assure her guilt, and it seemed to be working. As she found the file for Edelgard, she scanned it. She was the confident, but admiring house leader of the class, and as Billette scanned through her file, she widened her eyes in shock. How did we not know about this sooner? Billette smirked, realizing the potential plot that this could provide her. Lil Miss Perfect's hiding her great secret, I see. Take it from me, Missy, nobody escapes the great Billette. As Billette snickered to herself with an evil feeling, her mind could only fuel her desire. Soon enough, a great surprise would be made, and Edelgard would be the very victim of it. Chapter 23, Solar Songstress. There was no beauty to the place whatsoever. The girl looked around her environment, and could only find the faces and bodies of poverty and sadness. It was always like this, and nobody had ever managed to find an escape. There would always be coughs, cries, and violence. Did the general populace come to offer their help? No. They never did. The people of royalty and nobility would always look down on everyone. They already had a way of comfort, so why would they need to go out of their way to help others reach it? She looked down. Her clothes had been tattered. She was growing older, and her body was beginning to show it. The once luscious and long hair was short. Without any hair products to properly help her, it had turned into a short, dry mess. Then there was her pale complexion, which was always overshadowed by the dirt around her body. Indeed, she made no effort to show those above her that she was not that of a beggar. Even if she did, it would always shine through in the end. If she could barely speak the language of her only people, then she could not even have a chance of advancing in high society. When the girl looked back up, the gray brick wall awaited her front gaze. From the left and right, were that of the cold stares of the older people who previously gave up hope. Soon enough, she would join their ranks. She was growing hungry. How many days had passed since she had last eaten? Every time she stole, both her fear and guilt always heightened, so she only did it around every few weeks. Begging helped only in a few instances, however with so much competition, it was a difficult thing to do. Slowly and slowly, her humanity was being defiled, and eventually, her existence altogether would be forgotten. A mark on humanity was all she ever wanted in that moment. As if it were her final attempt before her hope was lost like those around her, she began singing. Her head was too weak to properly examine once more of the reactions around her, but she did not care. The words she sang were a jumbled mess of what she could eavesdrop in at the local theater nearby, and she knew that the lyrics were wrong altogether. It was a song of a happy tone, and that was why it resonated so much with her damaged self. However, it was only at a mediocre level. Someone had walked by her. From his speed, shoes, and manner of movement, she could already tell this person was of noble descent, despite only being able to look at her hands. The figure continued walking away, but she still hoped to leave her final mark. The girl kept singing. The melodies and soft fragrance of the song only grew, and soon enough, many of those around her began to secretly sit near her, as if to seek comfort. It was still not enough to help her livelihood, but it soothed her and many others. Footsteps came once more. This time, it was from the opposite direction. The very same speed, shoes, and manner of walking as before were present this time. Rather than fully exiting her area, the footsteps stopped in front of her. The legs turned, and soon enough the front faced the girl. She was still looking down, but she could hear his voice. It was a deep, rough, malicious voice, but it called out to her in the darkest of places. "Look up, girl." She did not reply. "So much of you has been taken away, and yet you carry a voice of profound beauty." The girl wanted to look up. At this point, she began realizing that she could have possibly found salvation. As those around her backed away from the man, she began to notice his hand reaching down towards her. "This is poverty. I've seen it every day when crossing here for my work, but I myself would die if the experience of it landed on my life. Tell me, do you not want to escape from here?" He lowered his hand, allowing the girl to slightly raise her head to show her attention. "Come with me, and do not look back. From here on, you will enter a life of extreme competition, greed, lies, and talent. It is indeed a life that nobody of your age would dare to enter if they knew the full consequences, but I see that nothing is as worse as the life you are currently residing in. I offer you my hand on a new life. Would you like to take it, or will you swallow your last breaths and give up hope like those around you, ending in your slow demise, never to leave a mark into the future's hands?" With all of her willpower, the girl looked up. Her head felt heavy, but she wanted to do this. It was possible her life depended on this moment. She saw the hand. It was clean, healthy, and the arm behind it was clothed. She did not see the man's face, for she did not need to. Her hand slowly raised itself up. As it floated higher, she could feel the struggles she had been through for many years. All of her burdens, guilt, and difficulties were being weighed against her hand. She continued in raising it higher, up until it had finally reached a height that was above her own head. "Give everything you have to make this next step. You will need it for the struggles ahead." His hand lowered itself once more, and so too did the girl's raise itself. "Indeed, you will be giving everything you have for the life ahead of you." The hands finally contacted one another. As she felt his warm temperature, she began to close her eyes in fatigue. For the first time in her life, Dorothea had found a way to leave her mark on humanity. Finally, her name would be remembered. Dorothea's eyes widened, and she shot out of bed in a daze. Still in her blankets, her head tilted to the viewpoint of the clock strapped onto the wall, except it had been knocked out somehow from the wall. It must have been time for lessons to start once again. As she raised her blanket above her, she rose out of bed in fatigue. She touched her head to clear out any minor tears her dream had cost her, and made a startling realization. No escape, huh? She wiped her forehead. All this time, and I'm still sweating from recalling something like that. Oh yeah, I have that date to attend to today dash. She still had not completely recovered from her fatigue. Luckily for her, Bernadetta had thankfully waited for her arrival, so all she had to do was follow the blurry purple head beside her. As she recounted all that had happened today, her friend looked at her with curiosity. This might sound rude, but you're really piling it on, huh? Bernadetta had heard her mumbling. We've got a lot to study for this month, and you've got the soaring confidence to take it all in and organize dates. I envy you, Dorothea. Oh, please, it's nothing. All this time had passed, and yet her confident facade was still going on. As Dorothea peeked into the eyes of her best friend so far, she noticed that they were filled with awe. You really downplay yourself way too much, Bern. You're amazing, and you should know that. I couldn't even follow what I was asked of my father, and that's why I got sent here. I'm happy to have you around at least. It makes this second month here go by much easier than before. I could say the same for you, Dorothea chuckled. It was still a bright and early morning of the second teaching month. As Bernadetta and Dorothea spotted their classroom doors, they opened it with their usual levels of confidence. The twins took notice of them, and whilst Byleth continued his paperwork, Belette always stopped what she was doing to make her greeting heard. Oftentimes, Edelgard was always one of the first students in the class. She too would give a nod of greeting, and return back to assessing what piqued her curiosity, as Hubert was closely watching to make sure she could not stray from her path. Soon enough, Petra would come into the class, along with Ferdinand, Caspar, and Linhard. So much had changed in terms of everyone's attitudes to their class, but at the same time, it had felt as if nothing had been lost. Indeed, this was what Dorothea thought that an easy life would have felt like, but she could still not shake her fear away from her. As everyone had seated themselves onto their seats, Bernadetta had poked the finger of her friend. "Hey, Dorothea, remember when Professor Billet had given us presents to try and get to know us? I think she might try it again. I feel like you're sounding a little hopeful from that tone. What makes you say that?" Dorothea's interest had been piqued. "I mean, it seems plausible enough. She's gotten to know us for a month, so maybe she wants a second shot at it. I know I would too, if I were her." "That's an interesting thought." Dorothea had put her fingers to her chin. "I bet you now, someone might even bring it up to her dash. I do hope you are not starting another futile attempt at sharing gifts with the class, Professor Billet." It came from Hubert. In an instant, the sounds of panic had begun to arise from their female teacher. She stuttered to hide her already found secret. As Byleth could only sigh towards this event, he returned to looking towards the paperwork that was presented in front of him. "That's a secret and you're definitely not gonna know." As she forced a wink, the class could only snicker at the sight ahead of them. "Just go on and fess up, Professor." Casper cheered. "Maybe you actually got it right this time." "I wouldn't know, but there is a chance." "I highly doubt that," Linhard yawned. Suddenly, the class had erupted almost in a childish state of humor. Billet could only tense at how she was failing to handle the class, and as she looked towards her brother calmly still sorting his paperwork, she could only panic at what to do now. Should she raise her confidence and give the gifts, as the secret was already out, or should she continue feigning innocence? You were right on the money after all, Dorothea." Bernadetta chuckled, which had startled her friend. "That's strange. I don't think I've ever seen you laugh before." The two thought back to the month before. "It sounds sweet. You should do it more often." "Hey, I laugh when I'm having fun, which isn't all the time, admittedly." Bernadetta pouted. "I don't know how to explain it. It's like I can only do things when you're around dash." "Hey, flattering me isn't the best choice." She stammered. "I'm not completely perfect dash." "Nobody is, I guess." Bernadetta interrupted. "I've learned that here. We all have parts that we should focus on. Even someone like Edelgard had a hard time using swords in our battle at the Red Canyon, but she managed. I think, though, that some people are more perfect than others, right?" It was a surprisingly mature standpoint to base her theory on. As Dorothea looked at her friend with pure amazement, she had realized just how mature of a person her friend truly was. When she looked at her, always shying away from others and being timid, Bernadetta had never found time to show her true colors. In truth, she was a surprisingly gifted and talented girl. Some people are more perfect than others. "I guess that's a fair stance, and I really don't want to put you down," but Dorothea sighed. In the chaos of the class chaos, the noise had gone silent through her gaze of Bernadetta. "Bern, you shouldn't look at me like that. I'm not dash." As if in a flash, a red shadow had breezed past the class tables and made it in front of everyone's view. As if they were in a daze of wonder, the class watched as Edelgard spoke with confidence. "That's enough." She flicked her hair. Whilst it would have likely seemed out of instinct, Dorothea could see that she was doing it to allow the class to fix their attention towards her further. "We've all got our hunches, but we also have the beginner's certification exams soon. Do we really have time for this, or should we feign defeat from acting complacent?" Her words were direct, and carried the exact amount of formality and accuracy needed to properly take charge of the environment and shift it completely. Re-evaluate yourselves and take notice of what's really in front of you. This is the time to strike, so let's all make sure of it. The class suddenly shifted their nature. In such a quick span of time, Edelgard had moved the chaos of the class with graceful ease. As she walked confidently to sit back down, Dorothea and Bernadetta shared faces of awe. Their previous discussion had been completely forgotten. As Byleth finally settled his finished work within his drawer, he faced the class with a stern look on his face. Billet took notice of this as well, and she quickly moved aside, to allow the class to gain a full view of their main teacher. "Thank you, Edelgard. You managed to successfully begin class on time, So now we shall make sure to not make haste. Think nothing of it, Edelgard replied, but quickly began to reach for a pen to write on. Byleth now looked over to make sure the full class had their attention. As he brought a chalk from his main desk, he walked over to the board to begin writing the main subject of teaching. Naturally, after being scolded harshly from Edelgard, most of the class now focused their attention. That's amazing, Bernadetta muttered. You mean how she managed to calm the class down? Dorothea, didn't you see? It wasn't purely coincidence. She waited up until the time that our lesson was meant to start. Only then, did she give us her grand speech. Wait, what? As Dorothea looked over at the clock towards the front wall, she had noticed that Bernadetta's observation was correct. They were indeed but a minute away from the actual start of the lesson now. No way. She actually waited to scold us. Seems so. I still have a hard time realizing it fully. That's amazing. As the two finally focused on the lesson before them, there was but one realization that appeared inside of Dorothea's mind. So many people in this academy were talented, reserved, confident, and smart, and yet she was but a small dark patch within the large area of students before her. Whilst she continued looking towards their professor with a keen interest in learning, her fists had tightened in frustration. She knew it was wrong to feel so envious, but what could she do? She was but one commoner out of the plethora of nobles. That's about it, right? Billet groaned. We've been at it for weeks, and we're still discussing battalion formations? Even I'm getting bored, brother. You would do well to speak this of me after everyone has left, Byleth replied, whilst attempting to hide the irked feeling within his voice. Oh, please, I'm just speaking for the class as a whole. This is boring. As the class busily continued packing away their textbooks for the day, they slowly began to mute the sounds of the siblings arguing. Indeed, Edelgard could stop her entire class, but the force of the twins was far too strong for even her to reckon with. Much like their classmates, Dorothea and Bernadetta followed their class example, and continued to throw their notebooks away within their bags to carry for later. Despite how others may have thought of the lectures, they had helped Dorothea recover from her rough morning. Not only was she revitalized, but her cheerful demeanor had arisen once again. In tucking her fears away for now, she began to make her exit out of the classroom. Hey, aren't you gonna join me for tutoring with Professor Billet again, Dorothea? She stopped upon hearing this. When looking back amongst the pack of students already leaving, her friend had a saddened face, as if to say she would not be able to survive without her. It pained Dorothea to see this. Without giving a care, she had organized two clashing events without so much as a thought to it. I'm really sorry, Bern, I completely forgot about everything. Her voice did not sound as earnest as she meant it to be. I kind of organized a date without any real thought. I can always cancel dash. Gah, you're right. Bernadetta interrupted immediately, startling her friend. I know I'm not going to get over my whole confidence thing with you always here. I can try for today, but you're pushing me a little too hard right now. Dorothea was startled at first by her friend. Slowly and slowly, she was starting to notice a change in Bernadetta. Sure, it might have been easier for her, as it was Billet teaching her, but the confidence was inspiring. As she tried to once again cast her negative feelings, Dorothea smiled at her friend. I'll definitely join next time, sorry. Just one evening, and I'll be there for the next tutor session. Bernadetta's face lit up at this response. I'm counting on you to keep that promise. Yeah, I will. Dorothea turned back, towards the exit of the class. As she slowly made her leave, one last glance was given to the chairs and tables of education she was leaving behind. Beyond her gaze, was the sight of Bernadetta slowly taking her seat, whilst Billet stammered to organize her battalion sheets. Now, the sun was setting, but yet she had not fully prepared. As Dorothea scurried to her dorm, she slammed the door open in a panic, only to hesitate at the sight of her room within a mess of its own. She had spent so much time rushing to get ready, that she laid little regard to the inward appearance of her room. Damn it! She cursed, still yet to figure out a solution to the issue. What time was it? As her eyes rushed around her room walls, she failed to locate her clock. Finally, it was found on the ground, in a broken state. Was her dream so bad that it was shaken from its usual place? Now was not the time to think so, as her date was at a position of arriving at any given moment. Dorothea ran outside. She rushed along the stairs, and almost tripped upon opening the door, but she had to look at the clock tower from afar. There was just under 15 minutes remaining. Dorothea gave a breath of relief, and turned around to make another entrance to her dorm. The time she had left was nearly enough for her to fix her room, change her clothes, and practice her usual charming techniques. As she ran across the corridor, she halted before entering her room. A stroke of brilliance had struck her. She came back once more, and knocked on the door nearby. "Casper, you there?" Her knocking was faster than usual, but she gave little care in it. "I might be needing you right now." The door opened, and Dorothea instantly took her classmate's arm. "Hey, what's your deal?" "I'll explain it all as we go through it. Just do me a solid, and I'll help you out somehow later." "Okay." "This is not what I had in mind," Casper groaned. "Yeesh, even the dust in the corner spots, too? You've really got my work cut out for me, huh?" Casper had now been forced into a position he most hated. To him, the dormitories were not meant to be cleaned, considering how little he would spend his time there. As he complained, Dorothea found that his overall strength had come to be very useful in his assigned tasks. "Appearances mean everything, don't you know? My date may just be visiting me to escort me outside, but one glance at my living conditions could spell the end of it all. What would you do if you saw a girl with a messy room? Tell her to clean up, I guess," Casper remarked. "I mean, I'm not too much of a cleaner myself. You don't get it, do you?" Dorothea sighed. "This is meant to be important. My future is involved in all of this. Heck, it's more important to me than anything right now." Dorothea thought back to Bernadetta. The guild had somehow managed to not yet be cast away. "You say it's important for your future, but I've got training to do. You think that's not important for me? You can do training later. My dates come once per person, unless I get lucky. This is a whole other world to me, isn't it? Dating doesn't involve axes, or violent movements, so I'd say that's the case." Dorothea chuckled. "In all seriousness, I really have to thank you. This means a lot to me, so I'll remember it for later. Just feel free to pester me with a reminder, and I'll do you a solid and pay you back." Sure, I guess." The finishing touches were yet to be given. By now, Dorothea too decided to join in and help. She organized her carpets, stacked the shelves of books from whence they came from, and tucked her scattered clothes back into her cupboards. Finally, the clock which fell down was now stored elsewhere. As long as Dorothea could think of a good excuse, the academy would hopefully supply her a new one with little to no consequences. "Say, Dorothea, you're friends with Petra, right?" Dorothea was startled by this question. As Casper finished dusting off the last specks of dirt, he stood up and faced her in curiosity. Sure, she and Bernadetta had once made her a failed attempt at Brigidian delicacy, but would that classify them as friends? She assumed so, from the way they now treated one another. In finding her answer, Dorothea returned to reality to answer Casper. "I'd say we're okay friends as of now." "Why?" "It's, a long story." Casper thought back to everything that had happened the week prior. "I did something to upset her a few days ago. Despite sitting next to her in class, she spent the first day of our new month completely ignoring me. Wait, but you always did the same for her." Dorothea had to cut off Casper in a sudden realization. What exactly reversed the roles? Damn. You're really good at paying attention. It's a simple investment, Casper. I like keeping tabs on people, and you two just so happened to catch my eye a while ago. Dorothea switched topics now. Anyway, what's the scoop? It's kind of not a pretty one. Are you sure you want to hear this? Casper, you do realize who you're asking this to, right? Dorothea stammered in bemusement. I've lived a life full of ugly sights. I won't bore you, but you should know that it'll take a lot to shake me. Of course, she knew that this was a lie. She was still shaken upon what had happened to her throughout her life, but her curiosity had gotten the better of her. I guess I should cut straight to the point, then. I don't know how else to do things, and I'm sure you've got very little time before your date arrives, so dash dot. Casper scratched his head. You should know that me and Petra had some family issues. There was a conflict, which caused a fight, and now we both don't know how to do anything. I only found out recently, and from the way Petra acted, it seemed as if she didn't know yet before I told her. I tried to ignore her because it was too painful to have her greet me whenever I saw her, but I started feeling guilty, and it's been the whole reason I had to do something. I managed to work the guts to talk to her about it all, but she left without warning. Since then, she's been ignoring me ever since. It was indeed a lot of information to pass on to someone. As Dorothea took all of what Casper had said into her mind, she thought of how each entity would feel in this situation. Casper was clearly frustrated, and surely Petra might have known so as well. She left without warning, so maybe it was done as she felt the same as well? No, this was not right to Dorothea. Suddenly, an idea flashed in her mind. In an instant, Dorothea had figured it out. It was not just Casper that had felt out of control, but Petra, too. She could not tell Casper yet. It was his own journey to make, so she simply wanted to guide him. Look, Petra is a smart girl. She has her reasons for things, and from what I could see, it might be that she wanted you to react. Casper stopped scratching his head in embarrassment, and looked up at Dorothea. What do you mean, exactly? She didn't give you an answer, because you still had yet to give her one yourself. Whatever choice you made was bound to cause some kind of consequence, but the possibility of resolving it all in the end is still possible. Casper, you still have a chance at friendship. You just need to put some thought into it all, but I know you'll get there. That was surprisingly insightful. Hey, I'm happy to help. As Casper retraced his mind, he noticed how Dorothea must have had some truth in her words. He nodded his head in approval, and smirked in realization. Yeah, I can do this. Thanks for the help. I appreciate it. Suddenly, Casper noticed the sunset growing darker than before. I should probably be leaving now, huh? Yeah, I've got a date, and it'll look strange with you in here. Hey, you dragged me in here in the first place. I've got nothing to answer for. Casper joked. Yeah, just get out of here. Dorothea retaliated in jest. As Casper rushed to open the door and make his exit, he made one last look at his new friend. With a smile, he gave his goodbye. I'll remember that. You're pretty cool. You do know that. I know now. As Casper ran back to his initial dorm room, Dorothea stared back in lament. Did she really say what was right? Had she truly helped? Was this truly the facade of herself that she wanted to convey? As Dorothea gripped her fists in annoyance, she bit her lip in frustration. How long would it be until she eventually caved in and broke? When would she reveal her true colors, and when would she move forward without looking the other way? To her, she was alone in an empty world, never to know when her internal fight would end. Chapter 24, Curious Mindset. Sothis had always found herself becoming annoyed at the tendencies displayed by Byleth. Whilst at first it was his manner of speech, it transformed to his oblivious nature to human thoughts, and quickly evolved into his absolute consciousness of sticking towards the rules set on him. Indeed, Sothis was finding him infuriating. Thankfully, from time to time, she had found an escape. Even if her connection to Byleth was weaker than that of her brother, Sothis could grapple onto it in the most critical of moments. If she had found Byleth insufferable to manage, then without a word, she would manage and quietly observe his sister. Neither sibling would take notice of this switch, and in that being so, Sothis had found entertainment from the differences in mannerisms displayed by each sibling. She would not always be allowed to observe what Byleth was viewing, however. Only a few times a week was she able to truly harness this switch, and for only a few hours could she manage to hold on to Byleth. Once the hours had ended, she was forced back into staying with her original vessel, Byleth, much to her dismay. On one particular day, Sothis was at her wit's end. So many mysteries had plagued her mind, and yet here she was, watching Byleth agonizingly sort out his documents of roster sheets which had been messed up by his sister. He was a slow worker. Sure, he traded his speed for being more meticulous than that of anyone else, but this made it so that it was a boring sight to behold when watching from a distance. Suthies pouted. How long had she been watching this activity from her distance? She had both desired and rebuked the answer to that question. Finally, as if to say that Byleth was an infuriating presence, she groaned out of annoyance. Byleth continued ignoring her. She tried once more and proceeded to fail yet again. Have you no other concerns than that? She snapped. We have far more pressing matters to attend to, and I have the discomfort of witnessing you fiddling with those sheets of paper. I cannot speed up this process any more than I have. Byleth shot a rapid response, however this had further infuriated the girl. Your sister shows much more haste than you do. That is her biggest weakness. I trust you should already know that. Any words that had come out of Byleth's mouth were short, logical, and concise. These were the things that Suthies wished he was not. As a result of this, she was stuck. Her desire to roam the monastery halls freely was great. Usually, she was able to do so, however her tie to Byleth was stronger than her will was. If she were to leave, her distance would be held back if her carrier did not follow her. I do not like these conditions. How dare you fail to respect my orders? If you really wish for my work's finish, then I suggest waiting? You have been at this for 2 hours now. Can you see why? His emotionless tone when speaking was greatly annoying. He could say such powerful phrases, however, Byleth had a peculiar tendency to abolish the power that those highly spirited words carried with them. Almost every quality of Byleth was that of which Suthies detested. She wanted to object further, however being with Byleth had kept her safely from harm's way, so she knew she had no right to complain, yet she always did. For some strange reason, she felt fear around anyone but the twins. It was as if everyone had the potential to become a future enemy, which was strange considering the current circumstances. The students were far too weak as of now to oppose the siblings, and the higher UPS in the academy would suffer severe allegations if they were to go up against them. Why was it that she could feel such suspicion, though? It was for this reason that Suthies had compromised to be with Byleth. Any time she spent with his sister was that of danger. She communicated far too much with those around her, and Byletta's rambunctious tendencies often carried a level of risk that Suthies was not comfortable with. Wait, on second thought. Byleth stopped working when he heard those words. That utterance was not meant for you. Continue working. There was no point in taking such breaths, then. Byleth returned to his work, however this response had sent Suthies grappling her hair in preparation to tear it out. That was it. She had spent far too long with Byleth, and to do more of this would further send her to madness. She was going to switch siblings. Never before had it occurred to her to do so. It was always a hard act. Byleth was a person who for some unknown reason, had a weaker link to Suthies. It took her all her energy to grapple onto her mind. Whilst she could relax around Byleth, it was a different case for Byleth. She tested this on multiple occasions. On the first time, after Byleth had spoken to her properly after the battle in the Red Canyon, Suthies tried to do so, however she had felt a severe headache soon after. Before attempting to free herself from Byleth, Suthies uttered her final offer. I shall now travel to your sister. I am doing so because you are far too inefficient in getting things done. She had added the last part of her speech in order to form some sort of emotional pull from Byleth. You may leave. I will retrieve you after you finish with what you must. In saying this, Suthies was now at a tipping point. Stop regarding me as a child. She screamed, causing Byleth to feel an ache in his head. Do not pick me up, do not expect some sort of apology from my part, and you must certainly not ever respond to me if I am mumbling. It is usually a bad habit to mumble out loud, anyway. As sincere as this advice was, it was lost on missing ears. Suthies had already left Byleth's mind. From one flash to another, she had landed onto the mind of Byleth. Fortunately, she had not yet noticed. In order to bring amusement for herself, Suthies decided not to speak. Observing the actions of Byleth without her noticing was bound to be far more entertaining than that of her brother. Much to her surprise, it had already begun in earnest. As Suthies looked around, she noticed that Billet had finished reading her book within the Academy's library. As she closed it up, Billet mumbled to herself. It was nothing much to cry about to Suthies, but at least she did not have to witness Bylitha's neat tendencies. The Black Eagles are made up of students from the Adrestian Empire, and the Blue Lions are from the Kingdom, and, wait, I know this one. Billet scrambled for an answer. Suthies felt guilty for not helping and finding amusement out of her struggles, but how else was she meant to feel? All day long, she had been watching file after file being organized, flipped, and corrected. Ah! It's the Golden Deers being part of the Leicester Alliance. Ignoring the library's quiet mood, Billet had proceeded to jump up in triumph, apologized to Dimash the librarian for being too noisy, and then closed the book with a smug look upon her face as she carried it out of the library with her. Suthies was glad. Finally, she was going to explore the rest of the monastery. Noticing that she was beginning to feel weak from holding on to Biletta's conscience, Suthies had fought harder to grapple her control. Still, she felt that Billet deserved a compliment at least. That is very well done. You seem to be gaining far more intel than I could possibly manage so far. Billet screamed. She dropped her book in surprise, and as the thud rang across the halls, she had jumped up in fright over her mistake. In quickly picking it up, she checked the halls to see if she had disturbed anyone, and much to her despair, Seath was seen leaving his office to check on the loud noise. Realizing she had made her uncomfortable, Suthies spoke in guilt. My apologies. I had not meant to cause such a reaction. As excited as I am to see you right now, I'll need to get to you later. Seath was fast approaching. Realizing that Suthies had caused a new conflict, she backed away her thoughts and proceeded to hope for the best for Billet. Whilst she seemed to always get along with most people, Seath was one that had been exceedingly difficult for her to communicate towards. I would advise you not to make such noises in the academy halls. What made you startled to think of dropping such heavy luggage? His voice sounded irritated, however Billet could tell that he was trying to hide it as much as it was possible of him. I'm sorry. Billet lowered her head. She did not dare look up to Seath. Her fear towards harming her family's goodwill with him rested on her behavior. As an esteemed teacher of the academy, do you not think it wise to act as a respectable, responsible, and wise role model? Billet paused her reply in thought as to what Seath was hinting towards. As Suthies looked from one person to another, she spoke. I think he is implying you possess none of those attributes. Yeah, I got that. Billet hissed. Excuse me. Seath interjected once more. Billet stammered back in panic. An attitude so demeaning to be used is not an acceptable exchange. Do you not realize your behaviors are prone to passing on to others? That applies to the students. Especially I Billet bowed down. I didn't mean it. I swear. Seath looked towards Biletta's down-facing head. She had tightened her eyes shut, and he could already visualize that she must have been clenching her teeth in worry. After a sigh was given, he spoke. What's done is done. Seath brushed aside the conversation. I am an advisor, and an instructor. I can look past negative actions, but you must promise not to do this again. I'm sure what you did was a mistake, regardless. Billet was surprised. Seath had been nothing but a negative influence ever since her family had arrived at the monastery, and as such it was strange to see him like this. In reflecting what Flane had said prior, she noticed that Seath was indeed a kind soul deep down. As Seath was walking away, Billet had to interject. Aren't you going to report me to Rhea? She raised her voice on accident. I mean, I know you don't exactly like me and brother, so why are you giving us a reason to stay? You are a peculiar one. Why do you bring up a matter that could lead you into trouble? Is that why I see you not communicating all too often around my presence? Seath looked back, however his arms continued opening the doors to his office. I am an advisor first, and a human being second. I owe a great debt to Rhea, and she expects a great performance out of me. Also, regardless of my feelings for you, I am not a monster. I can see you still make an effort, and your desire to improve is apparent. You are making an excellent initiative in choosing to read that book. My worries for your lack of understanding would soon cease with your current pace. Billet once again stammered backwards. So much praise had come out of her superior, and she began feeling guilty for thinking so poorly of Seath. Suthies chuckled at this interaction. She had not meant to get her friend into trouble, but in doing so, the benefits had outweighed the losses. Billet slowly walked forward. She did not know why, but her fear and annoyance had begun to decline. Thank you. I don't know what to say aside from that. You are not out of the forest yet. Seath proceeded to close the door. I may advise you to keep your current pace, but that is solely because I have yet to trust you. Right. Billet found herself doing an incoherent salute. I will. The door closed, and Billet found herself smiling without realization. As she exited the upper levels of the monastery, Billet found herself skipping happily along the vast outside of the academy. Everyone was still on their break, and as such, students were not a common sight anymore. Seeing everyone go about their day normally was a somewhat nice experience, and Billet felt she should treasure it as such. Your brother is awfully true to form. It's almost at a scary level. I know, Billet replied to the spirit within her. She had grown up with Byleth, and as a result she had eventually grown out of his powerful tendencies. He does this stuff all the time. You learn to live with it eventually. We know so little about the ways of this academy, Suthies grumbled. Do you find it wise to waste such valuable time? You have nothing but careless movements on your body, and yet you remain as chipper as the ones that chip back. Birds? Billet inquired. If they are the ones that do the chipping, then so be it. It is the birds. Billet giggled. As she stopped skipping about, she realized she had found herself in the same grassy area that she studied with the students when the mock battle was upon them. A vision of nostalgia hit her, which was strange as it had only happened a month or so ago. As she rested herself on the grass, Billet witnessed the wind slowly brushing amongst the leaves of the trees around her. It was peaceful, and she liked that about this particular day. Sometimes, it's nice to relax, you know. I know all too well how it feels, but you must remember I do that an absurd amount of times to begin with. Suthies reminded her friend. Since she was never able to go anywhere unless brought to, she had found herself resting on the same throne that filled the twins' conscience in most of her free time. Why don't you explore the monastery? Billet asked. Whilst it would have sounded insensitive to ask, Suthies knew she was asking this out of innocence. As Billet brought out her borrowed book to read on the grass, Suthies sighed. I cannot do so without one of you bringing me with you. I can only go so far by myself, and you are the carriers that move me so. As such, I still have yet to explore places such as the monastery's church, and the training halls. Oh yeah. Billet realized. The halls were taken when we needed to prepare for the mock battle, and we have a church. This is a place filled with devout individuals. Why does it surprise you so? Billet squinted in embarrassment. It was such a great time to be outside today. Knowing her students, both Linhard and Bernadetta would be hollowed inside, most likely reading a book whilst they were at it. Edelgard, Caspar, Petra, and Ferdinand would be training, and she assumed Hubert and Dorothea most likely were accompanying their respective friend groups. Even now, you think of the students. Suthies appeared in physical form this time. She had a face of curiosity. Hey, can you read my thoughts? Billet backed away in surprise. Forget that. Why are you in front of me? Won't everyone see you? Only you and your brother are able. Not even your dear blood-bound father could see me. As for the thought reading, it brings me amusement, and as such I shall continue doing so. That's not very polite of you, is it? True. You seem to be considerate of my feelings, so I may do less for you, if that is the case. Well, thank you. Billet snapped, still slightly agitated at her powers. I appreciate it. To Billet, Suthies seemed like a lonely individual. When she thought back to it, Suthies must have been trying her hardest to reach out for the twins, and it had taken them 20 years to notice her. For so long, the twins had regarded her as a mystery. In truth, Suthies deserved the story of the world more so than anyone did. To be busily reading away on the grassy gardens of the academy was something that she would never be capable of. The thought seemed like a tragedy to Billet, and she wanted to do something about it. "Let's go." Those two words had made Suthies look up to Billetta's face out of surprise and curiosity. She could only smile back, and Suthies could only give a quizzical look out of confusion. "Where are we going? What more is there that you desire to do on this lazy Sunday?" "Show you around, of course." Billet widened her smile. It was an incredibly cheap smile, but Suthies could see she meant it out of kindness and sincerity. Suthies began to follow after her. Before she knew it, she was but an abnormal girl floating beside her friend. As Billet watched over her, she cared little for the nearby residents who showed concern for her behavior. In the walk that was to follow, both individuals would find a great peace that they could share only between themselves. The training hall had unfortunately not been much of a sight. It was always the usual for Billet to be seeing training dummies, bows, quivers, swords, axes, and the like. When traveling with her family, Geralt's battalion would often carry around these very things, which they used to practice with on a regular basis. As the two entered, the only thing of importance for her to be seeing was the various students practicing amongst themselves. As soon as Suthies had begun to yawn, Billet saw it as her cue to take her leave. The church was a different story. It was a building of great importance, value, and symbolism for the people of Sirio's teachings. As Billet exited the main hall, a large stone-made bridge had awaited her. Below the long structure, was a deep abyss of forest that would surely kill anyone who jumped off of it. This sight, coupled with the lush weather, was one of great magnificence. Billet immediately ran to the edge, and stared at the abyss below. "You are going to fall with this kind of carelessness. Have you no desire for safety? I thought you left to escape from brother, not take his aura with you." Billet slumped, causing her curiosity to peak once she had noticed the abyss below. "Is there anything interesting below here?" Suthies was taken aback by the sudden change of topic. "Are you expecting me to float downwards to be your fetch dog? A little scouting wouldn't hurt anyone, right?" Billet joked. "Who knows? You might find something that the church keeps secret down there." "I am taken aback." Suthies stammered. "Why is it only now you show intellect? The same words have been said by brother before. I know what to say when I need to. At least, I know what to say when I want something reasonable." Billet lowered her voice, and immediately Suthies noticed something was awry. "Well, you can't always get what you want, right?" She chuckled to hide her misfortune, but Suthies knew it was a desire far greater than most instinctive desires. "I shall descend downwards, then. Do not say I did not warn you that there is nothing of interest below." "Really? You will? I appreciate it." Billet smiled happily. "You resemble that of a child." Suthies sighed. "Whilst it's amusing at first, I can tell that you must annoy those around you without realizing it." Billet ignored the comment made at her, and as Suthies floated downwards, she waved her farewell to her. Whilst at first Suthies could be viewed easily, at a certain point she turned into a small spiky green dot. Eventually, she was blending in with the forest below at a perfect level. Watching this was interesting at first, but Billet was finding boredom within her later waiting time. She should be okay. She sat on the ground below her, making sure to slump her back against the walled side of the bridge. "I mean, I don't think that Suthies is capable of dying, right?" She still did not appear from below. Either Suthies had found herself in danger, or she had found something interesting that kept her busy. Billet could only come up with these conclusions, and as she sighed to herself, she found calmness yet again in the weather. The day was almost at an end, and the skies had turned a fresh orange shade. As Billet closed her eyes for a moment, she recalled all that happened in these past few months. So many close encounters, new friends, and fruitful beginnings had taken place. She hated to admit it, but Billet had found a new escape from what she did prior. As Billet smiled wistfully to herself, her eyes opened up to see the bottom area of a rich white dress. As she looked up, she could see green hair, fair complexion, and a crown befitting an archbishop. Funnily enough, it was exactly that. "What are you doing here so solemnly, child?" Rhea spoke, and immediately Billet stood up in panic. She spoke so calmly, and there was little hint of anger or annoyance at Biletta's attitude to the supposed holy ground. Many people find peace within the church, but you are rather odd to be doing so on the bridge leading up to it. Rhea smiled. I was just in a daze. I'm really sorry. Why are you so frightened? You remind me of a small rabbit who is so easily startled by the slightest of movements. It's most amusing, but I want you to know you can be more relaxed around me. Bilette was frightened by Rhea. Maybe it was due to how Geralt and Byleth had made an active effort to avoid her, or it was because she was meant to be her highest superior, but Bilette found her to be a startling force. I'm sorry. I'm not exactly used to speaking to someone so special, you know. Bilette pleaded, almost as if her job as a teacher was at an end. You are free to relax. I know you have a hidden side. You can show that. I'm hoping to not seem like an unreachable force. There is serenity in finding an equal. Bilette stuttered. She had never found herself doing so that often in her life, but Rhea was capable of making it so. You see us as equals. For both parties to acknowledge one another as the same brand, they must first be acquainted. That is how all friendships are formed. You really make the simplest thing sound smart. Bilette spouted, but immediately stammered. I mean, it's not like I mean harm. I just Rhea smiled. Bilette stopped her panic to look at her. Such a gentle persona was coming out of her, and the calmness of the wind had helped accentuate this. In a moment of silence, Bilette found herself not looking at Rhea as someone higher than her. Are you willing to talk to me? The Archbishop reached her hand for her new friend to shake. To Bilette, her hand looked like the gates to a new world. It was one that not many people would even be allowed to reach, let alone hear of. As Bilette stared at her hand, she realized that Rhea had absurdly fair skin. She must have been living a life of great luxury, and how she achieved it was something Bilette could potentially find out at this moment. Go on, Suthis shouted. Take her hand. Bilette looked back. Her friend had returned, but what she found below was something that had completely escaped Biletta's mind now. As she looked back at Rhea, she closed her eyes, until finally the two entities linked together to form an alliance. I'm sorry. I don't usually make a lot of bonds with people. Most of my higher UPS are just my father and his band of mercenaries. That's fine, child. Meeting someone like you, who so deeply respects the boundaries of others, and cares for the ones around her, has proved to me that I made the right choice in choosing you and your brother to teach at the academy. Thank you. As silence drifted between the two, Rhea walked towards the entrance of the church. Would you like to visit the holy ground? It would be a shame to come so far and miss it. Yeah, you make a good point. Right, I'll come along. Bilette ran after her. I'm sorry that you have to go in a second time for me. Rhea chuckled. No need to worry, child. I can understand your position, and it's okay to ask for what you truly want from those around you. Bilette hushed her response at this moment. She simply followed after her new friend, and as they passed through the gates of the church, she could only admire the stained windows of great marble walls enclosing her. The floor was patterned, and the large dome-like structure from the outside of the building could be seen from an inward view on the ceiling. Across the hall room of benches and worshippers, giant pillars had stood upwards, and they reached to the skyward ceiling above. It's beautiful. Bilette could only stop and stare, leaving Rhea to walk past her. When those outside the academy's grounds are allowed inside, this is the place that is most often crowded. People respect and admire the church, and they find comfort in the carvings and pastel colorings of this area. I can see why. Bilette walked forward to further admire the wooden benches around the hall. This place is so huge. I can't believe the academy had such an amazing area hidden inside. It is far from hidden, child. You simply never took interest in it. Rhea muttered. Oops. Her careless attitude had finally settled, and Rhea smiled in seeing that Bilette had slowly adapted to her new situation. Come, child. There is still a place I would like to show you. Right. Bilette kept herself close to her friend. As she followed after Rhea, Suthis once again popped up to float after the two. On the far left end of the hall, was a small entrance outside to a minuscule bridge. There were little upwards barriers to support it, and Billet could tell this was a place to visit with great caution, or was it? The upwards tower at the very end of the bridge had already let the forces of nature pollute it with stains, weeds, and vines. It could still be entered with careful movements, and Billet could tell that the view from above must have been just as spectacular as it was from their current position. I usually find peace here. On my small breaks, I find myself standing in this very spot. This place, the Goddess Tower, it brings me peace. Billet was speechless. As she stared upon the tower, she found an emotion within her that resembled that of Ria's words. It was one of peace, an escape that was unreachable to the outside world. I don't know what to say. Billet kept staring in awe. Tell me, child, what brings you at peace? The question was fast. It had come at a rapid pace, and as Billet looked away from the Goddess Tower, she looked down at Ria, who had attempted to speak as a voice of reason. The orange sun descended downwards, and the crinkled leaves of the Goddess Tower floated around the two in the wind. Wait, what do you mean? Do you feel alone in this world? Ria further pushed the boundaries of their new friendship. Are you capable of something that no one else is? Billet walked backwards in confusion. Suthis voiced herself behind Billet, as she too had found an anomaly within this question. Either Ria was referring to discomfort as Billetta's inner feelings, or it was something far more secretive. Is she referring to me? Suthis peeked curiously. This is it. Ask further. This archbishop person seems far too suspicious to leave unattended. Billet wanted to ask Suthis how she should go about with Ria. Should she land straightforward and mention the divine pulses, or was this far smaller? For all Billet knew, Ria just wanted to help her adjust to life as a teacher. I don't know what you mean. The only answer that was given was one of escape. Suthis groaned in agitation at Billetta's simple question, but it was all she could think to reply within the heat of the moment. Forgive me for the intrusion. I apologize if I made you uncomfortable. The archbishop looked down in frustration. Only a muttering whisper was heard from her. Should it not have started now? Wait, what should have started now? Billet had accidentally raised her voice, causing Ria to become startled for the first time. Do you know something I don't? Tell me, please. Idiot. Suthis shouted. Don't beg. You will lose the higher power. There are things everyone must not know. Ria began to slowly talk. It was clear that she was stuck for an inescapable answer. Allow me to carry the burdens you brought with you. In due time, will these responsibilities hold you down, but I aspire, still, to help you. That's avoiding the question, Billet rebuked. At this moment, all statuses of higher and lower power were lost on deaf ears, and the two individuals had found themselves at the ledge of a pursuing conflict. What responsibilities do I know, do me and brother carry? Why are you helping us so much? What's causing you to take such an interest in us? It was a flashing moment, one that Billet would never forget. A face of anger came upon Ria. Immediately Suthis hid behind her carrier, and Billet once more stepped backwards. She quickly returned to her usual form, but it was clear from her clenching hands that Billetta's frontal assault had gone too far. Child, you will find only the best of success if you can learn to trust me. Do not be so scared. I will aid your confusion and help you cope. They were no longer at the barrier of friends. In this moment, Billet felt herself being thrusted into the role of Ria's worker once more. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dash. I got carried away. It is my fault for being so rude to you. Ria walked past Billet, and as she did, Suthis had maneuvered herself away from her. I know we overstepped our boundaries, but I hope we can reach the previous level of friendship we were once at before if you are alright with it. She was not okay with it. Billet felt scared at this moment. That face she made, what was it? Was Ria angry? If so, how did she make Ria angry? Billet could only respond in one way to Ria's question, but even she as well was not satisfied with it. Right. Ria left the two alone. As Suthis finally regained her confidence to talk, she tried to say something, but no words could be formed. They were left speechless. This encounter had gone so fast, and yet so much could be inferred from it. Just like that, the two had decided to call it a day. Sothis could no longer hold her link with Billet, and as she left, she could only say a farewell before the two were left to think to themselves about the events of the day. Whilst Sothis had never been able to tell Billet of the things she had found below the church bridges, she would forever keep thinking about it. Below the monastery was an object or being that she would soon find out about in the later months of the twins' first academic year. Below the bridge was a rusted, barren, but seemingly ancient mechanism. The thing Sothis would never know about it was that it was a weapon used to bring bloodshed across Fodlan. Why it was used, or what became of it, was something that would forever haunt Sothis in the coming years. As such, she never brought herself to inform the twins, even after it was too late. Chapter 25, The Abnormal Dagger. Whilst everyone was busy relaxing on their break before the month's lessons started, the Blue Lions took a day in advance to go over any details they had missed before the term through an extra seminar that Manuela hosted. Whilst not absolutely required, many of the Blue Lions found themselves attending it out of the desire to learn. The class to the Blue Lions was directly next to the Black Eagles, and despite the differing oppositions of both sides, the area had the very same type of layout as their enemy's class. The carpet was the same, and the chairs, desks, and board were very much identical to that of the Black Eagles. The only difference was the shade of blue on the floor's carpet, and the differing layout of books on the shelves. It was always like this for every class, as they often needed a way to differentiate themselves from the opposing houses, without compromising too much to truly separate them. Everyone had sat on their assigned seating. Certain students had wanted to be with others, and so they chose to sit beside those whom they had preferred. So long as they continued to complete their assignments, Manuela had never had any issues with the Blue Lions. As such, students such as Mercedes and Annette sat next to each other, whilst others, such as Dimitri and his carrier, Deduce. Felix had a strong dislike for the two, so he had sat far back. In order to make sure Sylvain did not do any skirt chasing, as Dimitri had put it, Ingrid had forced her childhood friend to sit beside him. With her around, Sylvain found it difficult to woo those of the opposite sex. Finally, there was Ash. He was a relatively quiet boy. He was timid at first, but spoke when anyone desired so of him. Despite everyone's relatively different personalities in the Blue Lions, Ash was respected for being a kind and obedient peer among the class. In the seating plan for the class, Ash sat near Annette and Mercedes. He never talked to them often. On rare occasions, the girls had noticed and wanted to keep him company, but he always felt it rude to disturb them. On some occasions, Ash had previously studied with Annette, however it was not yet at a level of proper friendship. Even if he never truly made a best friend yet, Ash was happy simply being acquainted with everyone. All right, class, it's time to discuss the mission given to us this month. Manuela had halted the students from leaving. As everyone stared curiously at her direction, they all knew this brief was of great importance for the class. As with last month, I want to assign Dimitri to make sure everyone and everything is in order. Don't do a rough job. Yes, Professor. Dimitri rose up. As the Blue Lions house leader, he was also the main representative who was tasked with helping his peers. As he faced direct eye contact with Manuela, he awaited his following orders. I'll do as I did last month, so have no worry. Wonderful. Manuela diverted the topics of conversation, allowing her to hold the floor of the exchange again. Right, as for what we need to do. It's not much, but we need to help those in the local town besides the monastery in regaining their supplies again. Some rare materials were imported sometime last month, and after some bandits caused a ruckus, a mess was made. I know it's grunt work, but a job is a job. Just help with the clean out, and we'll be done in no time. As Manuela had already started to clear out the desk for herself, she realized that she forgot something important. Oh yeah, you're all dismissed. Thank you for the lesson, Professor. The class all chanted in habit. As everyone had begun leaving, Annette had approached her fellow classmate, tapping his shoulder in the process. Hey, Ash. Are you coming to study again with me in the library? Ash looked back at his classmate. He had completely forgotten to set aside his book, and grew far absorbed into the oncoming conversation. Annette had been told on numerous occasions that her constant habit of always studying was creating an unhealthy workload for her, however in time she had grown to enjoy it. Occasionally, Ash found himself asking for her help whenever he so needed it. "Ah, you really need to take a break for yourself sometimes. You know that, right?" "Oh, stop, I can still go a few rounds," Annette teased. "I'll have Mercy helping me, so it's fine." Despite being afar, Mercedes had sent a wave from a few tables away. Ash and Annette waved back, and they both returned to their conversation. "I don't want to intrude all too much, so it's fine. I'll join maybe, tomorrow, or so. Are you spending today rereading that story on those nights you really like?" Annette had slowly learned of Ash's habits, and as such, she had already prepared her pinpoint guess as to how he would be spending his time. Yes. I'm surprised you know." He was shocked, but in retrospect, Ash realized just how smart Annette was. "I've said this before, but I admire how diligent you're able to be. It's inspiring, Annette." Ash smiled lightly. As Annette shied away out of embarrassment, she made sure to reply back to her friend. "I appreciate you saying that." As the two found almost nothing to say, Manuela had found this to be the prime opportunity to interrupt the two. She quickly put her hand on Ash's shoulder, causing him to become startled at first. "You lovebirds can chat more later." Manuela had put on a far more serious tone than before, which startled the two. Usually, she had always carried a lazy attitude with her. "Ash, I need to speak to you in regards to this month's mission." Annette knew it was her opportunity to leave, and as she waved goodbye to her classmate, she signaled to Mercedes to leave with her. Meanwhile, Ash had focused again on his teacher. "Oh." He quickly moved aside in order to swipe away Manuela's hand. He fixed his head on her face to show he was listening. "Not to worry, Professor. I may be a commoner, but I can still conduct myself at a reasonable level for the school dash." "Oh, your attitude to work is just as good as most nobles around here, maybe even better, but that's besides the point dash." Manuela hushed her tone in order to make sure that the last remaining students were not listening. "The task given to our class is no problem, at least for us, anyway. I just want to make sure you're feeling okay in case you know of what assignment was given to the Black Eagles. If you didn't already know, well then I guess Cephas just shoved me with the hard job to deal with." When Manuela had said this, Ash continued showing a face of confusion. The silent treatment caused Mainla to groan. "Ah, so he did shove me with the hard job. What exactly do you mean?" Ash grew worried. Manuela did not have an easy way of saying this, so she allowed Ash some time to question his new circumstances. "How does this month's task for the Black Eagles link to me exactly?" "Well, Manuela took some time to find her words. "They've been told to dispatch some bandits after a mess happened near Fairgus. It's just a few commoners and a noble, but the force is being led by someone you know all too well." Ash had only had a few people he cherished in his life. He thought back to his siblings, and his father. It surely could not have been them. They were fairly respectable individuals, and they would do nothing to disappoint the ones whom they loved. "Wait, Professor, I'm sure there's a mistake dash," the boy stammered little by little, however Manuela continued speaking, much to his dismay. "The leader of the group sending their forces against the church is Lonato, your stepfather." Ash finally did it. The book he had unconsciously held onto was dropped out of shock. The one who took him in, cared for him, and nurtured his goodwill, that was the one ordering the lives of people to disappear. He did not know what to feel at that moment. Already, the month was starting, and he was in an unforeseen circumstance. Just as always in his life, he was unable to do anything to change it. In Bear, it was the city that was the capital of the empire, which was where the Black Eagles hailed from. It was a bustling city, filled largely with the brightest of environments, but the darkest of secrets. Just as the bandit had previously stated within the Red Canyon, there was a secret alleyway beside the Middlefranc Opera House. It was a place that Dorothea had previously worked for, and she was largely accustomed to it, alongside the dark alleyway besides it. The sight of beggars and vagabonds was highly apparent within this area, and even more so in the sewer pipes within it. Down below was an entire network of illegal smuggling to fill out and complete the stocks of the hidden black market in the empire. The area's sheer foul smell was enough to ward off the Empire officials, and when using the ladder to go to this very place, only the most hidden and elusive of criminals and sellers could be found here. As they carried out their trades of various drugs, weapons, and slaves, each vendor showed an apparent glint in their eye as they reaped their rewards. The best item of all that was valued by everyone, was that of the forbidden crest stones that were largely bought by the dark officials of Fodlan. These very stones were capable of bringing such immense fear, due to their political power. In carrying one which your crest did not correspond towards, you would immediately turn into that of a monster of mass destruction. Few had lived to tell the tale of what these beasts resembled, however, one thing was for sure, they were a powerful weapon. As a masked figure walked by, he made sure to check the stalls, eyeing those who would have been selling the stones in the process. Finally, after settling on a vendor, he approached them. These stones, he pointed, catching the vendor's attention as he turned around. Are these the ones I have heard so much about? The vendor had an ugly look on him. It was clear the atmosphere of the alleyway had gotten to him, and there were various scars and markings seen on his face. He had little hair on his head in carelessness of not looking after himself. From his pure smell, the Flame Emperor had to step away in order to not put up with him any longer. Crest stones, yes, I have them. Pretty seashells that you collect in order to display for crap all? Then you're in the wrong market. His voice and attitude was unforgiving. As he sneered at the Flame Emperor, his hands picked up a small spoon to scoop out a handful of the stone. Take it or leave it. I've got a business to run, and I ain't gonna have this ethical philosophical shit if you start window shopping. Of course, I doubt you never considered those points before doing this trade dash. Immediately, the Flame Emperor had to dodge a stab attempted towards him by the vendor from his insult. Ah, so you're flexible, eh? He smiled slightly, but pulled himself back to not arouse attention. A competent customer should venture a fine trade. Step on up and buy 'em. What can I do for you? The Emperor did as he was told. As he looked at the stones, all the senses but sight within his mind halted. Nothing mattered in this world but the stones. On seeing them, he looked up again at the vendor with fierce determination. I'll take your entire stock. With no rise or decline of intonation, the Flame Emperor had lost his previous conviction. You might be chased down by the officials if you take that many dash. I do not care for tha dash. What that means is dash, the vendor raised his voice and eyebrow out of annoyance for being interrupted. That you need to avoid getting caught, and neither will I be at fault for selling these gems to you. Understood? The vendor groaned. He had to put up with people who thought highly of themselves on a regular basis, and as such, he had mastered how to shorten them down. As he turned back to fetch a piece of paper and pen, he started calculating the costs, having already been aware of the amount he was selling. Don't use 'em all at once. The additions were made, until finally the paper came forward to the Emperor, with a large sum of money on display. This is your total. Hurry up, then. The Flame Emperor stayed silent. As the vendor looked at the mask of his client, he grew annoyed. He hated overconfident customers, but more so for the ones who took their time. Hey. This ain't a cafe to chat away your time dash. I should have made this clear beforehand, but I will do so now. The Emperor looked up at the vendor for the first time, and his reflective purple eyes showed through. I won't be making any payments. An axe came out from behind the cloak of the Emperor. The vendor growled, but before he could even react, such speed was made far before he could bring out his own sword beside him. Blood had been splattered on the wall, and the faint scream had sent everyone around the stall to look in surprise at the ongoing drama. There was a common rule that the dark merchants had carried with them in the alleyway. In being a vendor, their lives were on the line, too. They knew this. As such, they had to always take out the very one who killed those of their occupation. They may have always been competitive, but the respect for the profession was immense. Their swords came, and suddenly a mass of people had circled the Flame Emperor. He simply put his axe away, and continued to look forward. Everyone had stares of such rage and anger. It was not often this was done, however it still greatly annoyed the market when it was. Finally, he spoke once more. Kronia, I've grown tired of this stupidity, the Flame Emperor called. Finish this for me. A flying figure had flown through. The Flame Emperor could only see the shadow of the skilled assassin through the lights upon the wall. Indeed, she was far too fast to keep up with when using the naked eye. As blood had splattered on the ground at an alarming rate, the Flame Emperor took notice that far more people were being killed than expected of the appointed killer. He would have stopped her, however she was always a force who reacted negatively to orders that did not suit her liking. The screams had finally stopped. The brown bricked market of the underground had turned into a dark shade of red, and it was clear that the corpses carrying this blood would attract massive attention soon enough. As the Flame Emperor looked upon the female assassin, he looked disapprovingly at her mannerisms. This was not what I had originally expected. Hey, you make the rules, and I bend them, she giggled uncontrollably. What's a few more piles of dead bodies to you? Admittedly, not very much. The girl who had carried the successful attempt at a mass assassination was known by the name of Kronia. She wore little clothing, consisting of a tightly made black suit, and was largely recognized via her scraggly orange hair and lightly shaded purple skin. As she licked her weapon of choice, the Flame Emperor stared at the dagger she carried. That weapon is one manufactured by elusive means. Should it be wise to waste its durability? The Flame Emperor reprimanded, which was replied to by an annoyed groan from Kronia. Hey, this bad boy keeps opening wounds long after someone's hit. It definitely helps dispose of evidence more easily. Kronia defended. Cleaning bodies is such a chore. Just let them die swiftly before they can heal themselves. At least this way, it's impossible to get them alive. The Flame Emperor did not bother with his reply. He knew Kronia was giving a fair argument. Soon enough, the town officials would come down here once the smell had reached them. Even worse, was that the Academy had somehow found out about this secret market, and as such, the Flame Emperor had to react swiftly before they were found. Take the stones and let us move onwards. Why do I have to carry them? Kronia groaned once more. You filled this place with more blood than I originally hoped for. We'll be found out more quickly, so you may as well atone for this mess. For the first time, the Flame Emperor had snapped. Never before had he had to slightly raise his voice to get someone's attention. You got spunk, she admitted. Fine, then. As Kronia began doing her requested work, she made sounds of annoyed grunts to show her annoyance. The Flame Emperor ignored this, and continued looking around the area out of needless curiosity. So much had happened below a child's eye in such little time. As he continued surveying the area, he reflected on his current progress so far. In due time, these actions would soon be worth it. Soon enough, the Flame Emperor would find salvation. Oh. Kronia giggled. I hear footsteps. The Flame Emperor looked upwards upon hearing this. Kronia was indeed correct. The feelings of slight rumbling had seeped into the room, and as they felt a pile of dust fall from the ceiling, it was apparent that the church had already caught on to what was going on. Now is too soon for me to be engaging with the enemy. Knowing what Kronia desired to do, the Flame Emperor let her pursue her desires. You can engage the enemy whilst I leave. Oh, you know me well. Kronia giggled. You're predictable in nature, but sharp in movement. He turned back before leaving. If I see failure on your part, I will be severely disappointed. Yeah. Kronia passed the stones to the Flame Emperor, and before leaving the area, the Flame Emperor looked back one last time. The face of Geralt entered. She had heard of his skills beforehand. From the profession shown in the Red Canyon via his children, it was clear he was a worthy adversary. Geralt gave one long look from afar at the mask of the Emperor, before being cut off by Kronia. Her movements were quick, agile, and delicate. In contrast, Geralt was slow, careful, yet unpredictable in his nature. Despite their difference in battlefield mannerisms, the two were an even match. Everyone, scatter and corner her. Geralt had ordered his comrades. Despite the clear instructions given, Kronia had disbanded her current fight and sent a circle of blood around Geralt in killing his allies. Only then, did she swiftly return to her main target. Geralt groaned. He had dealt with her kind before, however Kronia was a type of fighter he had never faced on a common basis. To instantly kill a large mass of soldiers in a matter of seconds was impressive. He had to keep his eyes peeled. Don't be surprised to see the sight of death on this very drab evening. Kronya made a connection from their swords. You're good. I like that. And you're annoying, Gerald smirked. Your point being? That you should die already. Kronya had begun circling him. Each of her strikes had made a significant slashing sound, however Gerald was just quick enough to counter her. It involved him having to maneuver around her, and he quickly began to realize that Kronya was slowly circling around him to wear him out as well. As he moved forward to disrupt her rhythm, Gerald had finally found his place in the battle. Tell me, he interrogated mid-battle. Who's the masked fellow who left this place? An escapee or follower of yours? What's it to you? You'd be surprised how important little details are to the church. It gets annoying to have to do this stuff, but I do it anyway. You must really hate yourself, huh? Seems so. Gerald joked. The two continued their battle. Finally, Kronya was getting worn out. As she slowed her movement, Gerald was finally able to scrape her cheek. She yelped slightly, but maintained her ground. She was still faster than Gerald, however she had also known she was at a weaker vantage from this point onwards in this battle. I'm tired of this. Kronya jumped back. She finally breathed her sighs of relief and asserted her maniacal self via laughter. Gerald would have pursued her further, however there was far more pressing matter. He grunted, as he gave a cautioned stare to his enemy. You're a smart one to run away, he said. Don't grow weary, old man. I won't. Silence had settled. Kronya gave her last grin of pleasure before leaving the area. Gerald glanced at the sewers beside him. This would become a very large cleanup, however, for now that was the least of his concerns. As he set aside his sword, he crept along to the stalls beside him. As expected, the stones were taken already. Gerald groaned. How am I supposed to explain this mess? Check the description for the links to the author.